So welcome to this ENT session, everyone. And on this platform of DBMI, we are starting a new session today, which is MCI batch. We are going to do the MCQs, the TND session, basically. So I'm your ENT faculty, Dr. Sanjay Agarwal. So although if you have seen the paper, you'll notice that there are about 50 questions, isn't it? But actually, with each question, we are going to discuss at least one, maybe two more, sometimes even three more MCQs. So in all, we are going to talk about roughly around 150 MCQs, 150 questions. So that is what you should keep in mind, that we have 100 or maybe 150 questions that we are going to do. And the second thing is, if you have any doubts or question, write your doubt in the Telegram group that we have, Bhatrin Bhatia TND, in that group. Don't write in the YouTube channel, because I am looking at the Telegram only. So I can only see whatever you're writing on the Telegram. I cannot see the YouTube. So if you write something on the YouTube chat box, I will not be able to see that and will not be able to answer that. And I've tried to make a very simple, not a very difficult question. It is a relatively simple question, but the main aim was to accommodate all the important topics of ENT. The main topics that you should know in ENT. That's what our main aim, that we should be able to cover the topics. And that's why wherever we have important topics, like when there is a question on autosclerosis or Meniere's disease or tonsillitis, I will tell you the other important points. I'll discuss the whole topic in all the important. So while we are doing this TND, I intend to do almost 10 to 15 topics. All the important points I'll tell you during those questions also. So very useful session is going to be. So buck up, guys. And like I said, if you have any doubts, please ask straight away. Don't wait. So are we all ready? First of all, I'm just saying all this because I can see that a few are still to join. So I'm just waiting for these guys to join. Once everybody joins, so let's start. The first question is this: a patient presents with dyspnea for few days of total thyroidectomy. There is no other complaint. Most likely cause. Dyspnea, I'm sure you know, is breathing difficulty. So the patient has a history of thyroidectomy, and few days after the surgery, the patient starts complaining of difficulty in breathing, dyspnea. No other complaint means no hoarseness of voice, no aspiration. So most likely cause. This is a very simple question which was asked last exam. I've changed the question a little bit. RLN damage. RLN, I'm sure you know, is recurrent laryngeal nerve damage. SLN damage is superior laryngeal nerve damage. Hematoma formation, or this is a normal finding after thyroidectomy. So try to write the answer in the Telegram chat so that I can see. And one other thing happens is that when I see your answers, and if they're right answer, that's okay. Then you are thinking the right way. But if I see many wrong answers, similar answer, and they're wrong, then I know how you're thinking. What is the problem in your thinking? Why the subject you're not able to? So I can correct that. I can give you the correct thought process. One of the thing is that when a topic comes in front of you, when the question comes, whether you're thinking about the topic properly or not, have you been taught in the right way? That's very important. That gets reflected in the way you answer. And that's why I suggest that please answer so that, as I said, I know how you have been taught or what you are thinking about. And so if there's any mistake, I can correct that. Because that's another important point. Because TND means what? TND session means that you've read the topics, you have read the subject basically, and A, you are assessing yourself, assessment, that are you comfortable, are you doing good or not. B, you can clear your doubts. If you have any doubts while reading, any topics you did not understand, you can always ask, and so we can clarify those doubts. So that's the second aim. And if you do this, if you follow in TND this this particular sequence that I told you, only then it is fully beneficial. If you don't study, you just come and just write the paper and just attend, it's not that much beneficial. Then for that you have to attend a proper lecture class, not TND. Anyways, so Abhishek says RLN damage A. Anybody else wants to answer this question? Yes, RLN damage. Correct. Recurrent laryngeal nerve damage is dyspnea. See, this is a very proper, straightaway question about vocal cord paralysis, isn't it? Now, vocal cord palsy can be due to damage of the 10th nerve, vagus, due to damage of the recurrent laryngeal nerve, due to damage of the superior laryngeal nerve, and due to damage of the external laryngeal nerve. So these are the four nerves, the damage of which can cause vocal cord palsy. Okay, vagus, recurrent laryngeal nerve, superior laryngeal nerve, external laryngeal nerve. Now, when the vagus gets paralyzed, that paralysis is called adductor palsy. And when the recurrent laryngeal nerve is paralyzed, it is called abductor palsy. These two don't have names. They are called superior laryngeal nerve palsy or external laryngeal nerve palsy. Now, these two are further divided into unilateral and bilateral. This is also unilateral and bilateral. So we have, these are the types of palsies that we have. Let's say, okay, these are the types of palsy. Now, in each of them, what is the main presentation or complaint? In unilateral adductor palsy, the only complaint is hoarseness of voice. And in this case, there is no hoarseness, so this cannot be true. In bilateral adductor palsy, there is aphonia, which is complete loss of voice, and aspiration, where the patient starts to aspirate the food that eat ending. So none of the complaint is in the choices given, in the question given. So this is out of question. Right. Unilateral abductor palsy, again the main complaint is hoarseness. This is not given, so this is not possible. Bilateral is dyspnea and good voice. So this fits bilateral abductor palsy because dyspnea is the only complaint and voice is good, so there is no other complaint. So this is the correct answer, bilateral recurrent laryngeal palsy. In superior laryngeal palsy, there is low pitch voice plus aspiration. None of them is in the choices, so this is not true. And external laryngeal palsy, only low pitch voice, no aspiration. So this is also not given. So obviously, this is the only symptom given in the patient, dyspnea. So it has to be bilateral recurrent laryngeal palsy, or you can say bilateral abductor palsy. So A is the correct answer, recurrent laryngeal. Sometimes to make it more difficult, they may give choice like the four choices. They may give like this: a unilateral recurrent laryngeal nerve palsy, bilateral recurrent laryngeal nerve palsy, unilateral vagus palsy, or bilateral superior laryngeal nerve. So unilateral, bilateral also they can give in. So in that case, it becomes very clear that it has to be bilateral vagus palsy. So very, very important MCQ. And the second thing you must know, I think we might be having question that in bilateral abductor palsy, this is another important thing. In bilateral abductor palsy, there are few surgeries that you might have to know, and this is another MCQ. What are the surgeries you can do? Type 2 thyroplasty, Kashima's operation, chordoplasty, Woodman's surgery. So these are some of the surgeries that you might have to do for bilateral abductor palsy, and this is important. This is what they ask in the exam also, and that's why I've given you these few points. So remember this, right? So this is our first question done. Now somebody is asking me, tell us the topics also. So before I go to the next question, I'll tell you the important topics of ENT. Okay. In ear, we have middle ear anatomy, seventh nerve anatomy, facial nerve anatomy, and palsy also, facial palsy. Then audiometry, tympanometry, uh, tuning fork, very important, tuning fork test, caloric test, malignant otitis externa, otitis media, surgeries of otitis media, glomus tumor, acoustic neuroma, autosclerosis. Autosclerosis is very important, and Meniere's disease is also very important. Maybe BPPV, less common, and cochlear implant. So these are the topics of ear. We're talking about ear topics. So ear has a lot of topics. Then in the throat, you have artery of tonsil, artery supply of tonsil. Then you have tonsillectomy, very important. Quinsy, laryngomalacia, laryngitis, croup and epiglottitis and tuberculosis, all that. Vocal cord nodule, vocal cord polyp, papilloma, Jenkins diverticulum, tracheostomy, tumors like juvenile nasopharyngeal angiofibroma, juvenile nasopharyngeal angiofibroma, uh, uh, nasopharyngeal carcinoma, laryngeal carcinoma. These are the three tumors from the throat that you have to. So these are the important topics in the throat. And then topic from nose and sinus. Nose and sinus, septum anatomy, arteries of septum and anatomy of septum. Then lateral wall of nose anatomy and sinus anatomy, not too much, few things, basic anatomy of the sinuses you have to know. Epistaxis is very important topic. Epistaxis, rhinosinusitis, especially fungal and atrophic, these two especially. Rest you can ignore also, these two. Then DNS, nasal polyps, then granulomas. Granulomas like rhinoscleroma, rhinosporidiosis, rhinosporidiosis, rhinophyma, these things. CSF rhinorrhea, inverted papilloma tumor. So these are some of the topics from the nose and sinuses. So if you can remember these topics from the ENT, I'm pretty sure that you'll be able to answer all the questions that they ask you in ENT. So you see, there are not too many topics. There are very few topics, and I intend to cover all the topics, the main points of all this topic today itself. So if you're paying attention today, if you read before or if you attended my lectures and now you're paying attention, I can tell you that you'll know all the important points that you need to know from this. Okay. So we'll go to the next question. Uh, for those who could not see in this, this last four names that I've written, I'm writing here the last four names. It is granulomas, you can see, like rhinophyma, rhinoscleroma, rhino, all that. CSF, rhinorrhea, because of my pick, maybe you are not able to see, and inverted papilloma. These are the last three names, which is hidden by my image there. Right. Okay. So, second question. Stapedectomy is one line for treatment for stapedectomy is a one line treatment for otosclerosis, otomycosis, otitic barotrauma, secretory otitis media. So please write in the choices. Comment what is your answer. Stapedectomy is one line treatment for. I told you surgeries of the year are important. So this is one of the surgeries that you have to know, stapedectomy. What is the answer? The answer is otosclerosis. Otosclerosis, the treatment of choice is stapedectomy. Treatment of choice is stapedectomy. There are two options in otosclerosis. Either you give sodium fluoride or you do stapedectomy. These are the two options you have. Rarely you might have to use a hearing aid. In rare cases where you cannot give any of the two, you might have to give hearing aid. But otosclerosis, as I said, is a very important topic. Like most common site is fistula antefenestrum. Then it is seen in pregnant ladies. So pregnant ladies are usually young ladies. So we see in those people, pregnant lady or young ladies. Then there's signs like a sword sign, paracusis willisi, Carhar's notch. So these are the few features. Then there is Gale's test. Tuning for test is negative. This is very important. This syndrome called Van der Hoef syndrome. So they ask you what are the features of Van der Hoef syndrome. There is otosclerosis in this. There is blue sclera. And there is osteogenesis imperfecta. These are the three features in this. And treatment, of course, I told you already, either sodium fluoride or stapedectomy, which is the treatment of choice, or sometimes you may have to add hearing aid. So very, very important. Otosclerosis you have to read very, very nicely. Okay. So before I go to the third question, there's somebody is asking me that about this hoarseness of voice both in unilateral abductor and adductor palsy. The answer is yes. Both can have hoarseness of voice. So one vocal cord, unilateral, one vocal cord is paralyzed. For normal voice, you need both the vocal cords. If one vocal cord is paralyzed, like in this case, then there will always be a change of voice. So both will have hoarseness of voice. To know the details how you have to, then it takes a lot of time. In our things, we have to complete all the questions in a certain amount of time. So we cannot go into the details of it. We cannot explain everything. So for that, you have to attend a normal lecture. But you have to remember these points, that on one side palsy, if there is one side palsy, it causes hoarseness of voice. That's the fact. Just remember that fact. Okay. Carhart's-Notch frequency is 2000 hertz. Carhart's-Notch is defined as sudden dip at 2000 hertz. So this is the answer, your answer. In bony conduction, BC is bony conduction audiogram. So you have to see audiogram. You have to do audiogram for this. Bony conduction audiogram. Carhart's-Notch, autosclerosis. Okay, so this one. Right. So what are the other choices? Automycosis is a fungus disease. In fungus disease, why will you do any surgery? You have to clean the fungus. Otite is barotrauma. Trauma to the ear to do sudden change of pressure. It happens in flights, and that is due to blockade of the station tube. So you just to open the station tube. You can give nasal decongestants. If the tube opens, or even you swallow multiple times, the tube will open and the otitic barotrauma will get relieved. So why do surgery for such a simple thing? And this is glue ear. And in glue ear, we do grommet insertion. The treatment is grommet plus adenoidectomy. We have question on this. So we'll know more about this. Okay. Glue ear is another very important topic. So autosclerosis we have done, one of the topics, very important topics. Next question. The most common cause of deafness in children: acute otitis media, serious otitis media, chronic otitis media, cholestoma. So which of the following is the most common cause of deafness in children? Acute otitis media, serious otitis media, chronic otitis media, cholestoma. Please write in the comment what is your correct answer. What do you think is the correct answer? AOM. So this in short, sometimes they will not write the full name. They'll say AOM. This is SOM. This is COM. You know. And cholestoma is also a feature of COM. So anybody wants to answer this question? Most common cause of, this is a very popular question, and the answer is serious otitis media, which is also called glue ear, which is also called otitis media with effusion. So same thing. This is the most common cause of if I use black color, is it okay? If I only use black color, is that okay? Let me check the other pen. I have two pens. This is better, I think. So let me use this pen. So I think I'll use only black. Maybe it will look better. So serious otitis media, ASOM, acute otitis media, and serious SOM, serious otitis media. What is the difference? See, both have hearing loss, and usually both are seen in children. Now this is the most common cause of hearing loss in children. Most common cause of hearing loss in children is serious otitis media. So this is one thing. This is the question that we have. But this patient has no other complaint Whereas AOM may have pain and may have ear discharge also. So basic difference is in the symptom in this patient. Then in the finding, this is red tympanic membrane. There is bulge on the tympanic membrane. There is fluid level seen, and there is a cartwheel appearance, and there's something called lighthouse sign. So these are the features. Whereas in SOM you have blue membrane, retracted, not bulging, retracted tympanic membrane, and air bubbles are seen, and foreshortened handle of malleus. And there is no investigation. You don't have to do anything. Here you have to do tympanometry, which is B type in children, and treatment we'll discuss this because in ASM we give nasal decongestants mainly. Initially we give nasal decongestants. If this fails, we do myringotomy. In this we always do myringotomy plus grommet plus adenoidectomy. So these are the difference between these two types of otitis media, which are both very common in children, and they use the difference between the two to frame questions very commonly. So you have to be very clear and aware of this so that you have no problems when you have to make a diagnosis. And sometimes they give an image also. So I have a question based on image. So then we'll discuss the rest of the points also. I hope this is clear. Next one. Gray-Singer sign is a characteristic sign in which are the following: brain abscess, lateral sinus thrombosis, extradural abscess, meningitis. So again, this is a question which was asked in your exam a few years back. It's an old question, and therefore it is likely to be repeated. So brain abscess is a Gray-Singer sign is seen in brain abscess, lateral sinus thrombosis, extradural abscess, meningitis. What is your answer? Please write. You guys are not answering. Only one or two are answering active. I always say this. I'll tell you also. See, in the class when there is a question answer session, any class, you should always try to answer the question. It doesn't matter it is right or wrong. Nobody punishes you for that. Nobody. Especially on online. I don't even know you. Nobody knows. So even if you get it wrong, it doesn't matter. But what is the advantage? The advantage is that, at least this is true with me, that we always remember our mistakes. If it is right, then you know there is no problem. But two things it does. One is when you answer, you are committed. You are committing it. That means you are more involved. Your brain starts working, thinking. If you do very passively, you're just watching. It's like you're watching a TV or a match. Somebody is speaking. Dr. Sanjay is speaking. I'm looking at the question. Aaya to theek, nahi aaya to theek. But when you start answering, then you get involved. Your brain becomes more active. So your brain becomes more receptive. So it is receiving the information faster and better, and it is going to remember that. So that's one thing. So it helps you. I always say it's like a fielder in the slip. When you play cricket, there's one fielder in the boundary, one fielder in the slip. Fielder in the boundary can relax. If the batsman hits, the ball is going to take time to travel, and this fielder on the boundary will get time to, react. But when you're in a slip, the catch will come, the ball will come very fast. So you have to be always ready. So your class should be you should be like a slip fielder in the class, because so many points we are going to discuss, you can receive them very fast. And the second thing is, if you commit, if you make right, if you answer, and if you get it wrong, you never forget. So we never forget our mistakes. So if the same question or a similar question comes in the exam also, then you can remember, oh, उस वक्त मैंने गलती की थी, you remember that time I had made a mistake, and so now you remember it. So always try to answer. Nobody is going to penalize you. Please answer questions. And Abhishek says it is lateral sinus thrombosis. Correct answer. Also sigmoid sinus thrombosis. Lateral sinus thrombosis and sigmoid sinus thrombosis are very similar disease, and these are all uh, intracranial complications of CSU, intracranial complications of otitis media. Otitis media. The only one which has Graysinger sign is either lateral sinus thrombosis or sigmoid sinus thrombosis. Okay, Dhanu has a very valid point, saying that you're watching it on the YouTube and you cannot answer on the Telegram because they are two different softwares. So watch and then shift becomes problem. I understand. I get that. Yeah, that's a practical problem. And the problem with me is that if you watch that YouTube, but I can do that. I can ask you to, but Telegram is better, faster, you know. Anyways, so you can answer on the Telegram or YouTube. Keep answering on the YouTube, doesn't matter. Now, Graysinger sign is a sign where there is edema over the mastoid in a patient of lateral sinus thrombosis. And in this sign, there are four signs. One is Graysinger sign, of course. This we know. There is something called Tobbe-Ayer sign. The other sign, there is Crowe-Beck sign, and there is delta sign. These are the four signs which are present in lateral sinus thrombosis. And besides this, there is a fever called Pickett-Fence fever. So this is a very important complications of otitis media. And any of this is a potential MCQ. I have asked this one, but in different exams they have asked all these names at some point in time. So every name is important that you see on your list. And other complications besides lateral sinus thrombosis, the other complications of otitis media are mastoiditis, petrositis, Grade-Negos syndrome. This is very important. And labyrinthine fistula. This is also very important. Meningitis. This name was given in the list. And the abscesses like extradural, subdural. This was abscess also were given in that list. So these are some of the important. The list is very long actually, but these are some of the important complications of otitis media. And I told you lateral sinus thrombosis has four signs and one fever called Pickett-Fence fever. In Grade-Negos syndrome, there are three D's. D, 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 D. And this is another very important MCQ. That's why I'm telling you. One D is discharge from the ear. One D is diplopia, double vision, and deep pain. Deep pain is actually retroorbital pain. Deep pain is retroorbital pain. Discharge, diplopia, deep pain. So these are some of the important complications of otitis media that you have to know. But if you read your books, they're divided into intracranial, extracranial. Intracranial are different, extracranial are different. But these are the simple ones that I told you. So this is another important topic. You have to know this. Next question. The discharge in case of colostoma is A. Copious purulent, B. Copious offensive, C. Scanty offensive, D. Thick scanty creamy. So again, a very useful question, very nice question actually. Let's see what you say. The discharge in case of colostoma: copious purulent, copious offensive, scanty offensive, and thick scanty creamy. Please answer this question. And the answer is scanty offensive. Scanty means less. Offensive means foul smell. And copious means too much, lots. So in colostoma is seen in unsafe CSUM. And in unsafe CSUM, the discharge is less scanty and foul smell, which is offensive. Scanty, offensive. Correct, Dhanu. Absolutely correct. Scanty, offensive. So this question is about, and copious and purulent is safe CSUM. In safe CSUM, there is copious and purulent, and because of bone erosion, that's very correct, that colostoma causes bony erosion, and that erosion of the bone causes that foul smell in the discharge. But this question is mainly about difference between safe CSUM and unsafe CSUM. Again, this is a very popular question. They ask you this, they'll give you a different set of symptoms, they'll give you, and they'll ask you which is seen in safe or which is not seen in safe, something like that, or which is seen in unsafe. So they can give you any symptom of the list that I'm going to give you. So I just told you the safe has less discharge and no smell. Safe has more discharge. Safe has more discharge. Unsafe has less discharge, which is scanty, and foul smell, which is offensive. This was the question, right? More means copious. Then this has pale polyp and nothing else. Unsafe has red polyp, red granuloma, colostoma. So in the question this was given, colostoma has which are the following. So colostoma means same thing, and more complications. So complication that we discussed before this question, unsafe. And perforation, all CSUM must have perforation. Safe has central perforation in the center of the tympanic membrane. Unsafe has either marginal perforation on the margin or attic perforation on the pars flaccida. Attic perforation is in the pars flaccida. So in CSUM there are three types of perforations possible: central, as you can see in the list, central, marginal, and attic. Central, as I said, is a feature of safe CSUM, and the other two, marginal and attic, are the feature of unsafe CSUM. And the last is treatment of choice. In safe, the treatment of choice is myringoplasty, and unsafe CSUM, the treatment of choice is modified radical mastoidectomy. MRM is modified radical mastoidectomy. So this is very, very, very important. So they'll pick up any symptom and they'll ask you, is it safe or unsafe? Or they'll pick up any three and one from the other side and they'll ask you which of the following is not in safe or which of the following is not in unsafe. So remember this, most of the things are seen in unsafe. Unsafe has a lot of things. Safe has only polyp and discharge which is too much, copious discharge. That's it. Right. Then about myringoplasty, they ask a question. About MRM, they ask a question, but that's another topic. So it is, as I said, is one of the topics. So we'll go to the next question. Not a symptom of Bell's palsy. Dropping of angle of the affected site, obliteration of the angle of the mouth, CSF otorrhea, and inability to close the eye. So which is not a feature of Bell's palsy. Dropping of angle of the affected side, obliteration of the angle of the mouth, CSF otorrhea, and inability to close the eye. So please write this answer. Please answer this so that let's see. I'm waiting for your answers, guys. And the answer is CSF otorrhea. CSF otorrhea. So Bell's palsy is idiopathic facial nerve palsy. And idiopathic facial nerve palsy means palsy where the cause of the palsy is not known. What causes the paralysis, that cause is not known. That is Bell's palsy, right? So usually it is a lower motor neuron palsy. Lower motor neuron palsy. In this, the entire face on one side is paralyzed. So all the muscle on one side are paralyzed, and that's why the muscles will not have not function. So the angle will be dropping. That side the angle will be drooping because the muscle is not able to hold it, and obliteration of this angle, these folds are gone. So there is obliteration. These folds of the face are gone, and eye also is controlled by the muscles. So eye closure is also not possible. Why will Bell's palsy have CSF otorrhea? Trauma. If there is a trauma, it can cause two things. It can cause facial palsy. It can cause CSF otorrhea. So when there is a trauma, there is a fracture and things like that, it can cause facial palsy and otorrhea. So facial palsy and otorrhea can happen together. But this facial palsy is not Bell's palsy. Why? Because you know the cause. You know the cause now. The cause is trauma. And if you know the cause, it is not idiopathic. And if it is not idiopathic, you can't call it Bell's palsy. Is that clear? So Bell's palsy is the one that you do not know the cause. The other thing in the Bell's palsy they ask you is the treatment for Bell's palsy. This is another very important point, where steroids are the main drugs for 2 to 3 weeks. Steroids. Additionally, you can give acyclovir, you can do physiotherapy, but steroid is the main thing. And if the steroid shows no response, after 2 weeks of steroid there is no response, then we have to do what is called surgical decompression of facial nerve. Surgical decompression of facial nerve. So from the Bell's palsy, these are the two most important things they ask you. A, what is Bell's palsy? It is idiopathic. What is the treatment? These are two very, very important. And this kind of question, which of the following is not seen. But facial palsy generally is a very important topic. I told you, if you remember, that facial nerve anatomy and facial palsy is a very important topic. Most common cause of facial palsy is Bell's palsy. This is the one that we discussed. Then it can be caused by tumor, infections like otitis media, malignant otitis media. A lot of causes. Trauma. Now trauma causing fracture of temporal bone. So this can cause facial palsy plus minus CSF otorrhea. This was what I was telling you. Now trauma can be two types. This is another MCQ. One is transverse fracture of temporal bone. One is longitudinal fracture of the temporal bone. So trauma on the temporal bone can cause two types of fractures, transverse fractures and longitudinal fractures, and both can cause facial palsy. and this is MCQ, that which of the two fractures causes facial palsy more commonly? So transverse fracture has facial palsy is more common. This is another very important MCQ. Longitudinal fracture, facial palsy is less common, but it is in both. One is more common, one is less common, but it is seen in both. CSF otorrhea happens in this. CSF otorrhea tends to happen more in longitudinal fracture as compared to transverse fracture. It can happen in both, but so more common is more common. So one has facial palsy more common, one has CSF otorrhea more common, but both can have both the things, facial palsy. So these are the few points about facial palsy, and few things you have to know about the anatomy of the facial nerve also. But because we have a question on anatomy of the facial nerve, so that one more point we'll discuss when we talk about that point in the anatomy of the facial nerve. Right? In the meanwhile, we'll go to this question, and they ask you to identify the structure marked in the arrow. So this is obviously the image of a nasal septum. This is nasal septum. So is this septal cartilage, vomer bone, perpendicular plate of ethmoid, and septal membrane? So what is this? Is it septal cartilage, vomer bone, perpendicular plate of ethmoid, or septal membrane? And yes, I knew that most of you will get correct. Correct. It is the vomer bone, and this is already given. If you look at the image, you can see it's written there. So obviously, in the exam, obviously it will not be written. So this is a perpendicular plate of ethmoid bone. This is the ethmoid bone. This is septal cartilage, and this is vomer bone. And the question is about the vomer bone, pointing at the vomer bone. Now, septal cartilage, we have to know two more points about septal cartilage. It is the only unpaired cartilage of nose. So if they give you names of the cartilage in the nose and they ask you which of the following is unpaired, then septal cartilage is the only unpaired cartilage, and it is quadrilateral in shape. The shape is quadrilateral, four-sided. Quadrilateral we all know. Yes, Raj, that's what I told you. It is labeled, so you can see this, but in the exam it will not be labeled. This is our training. Basically, we are training. Quadrilateral cartilage means four-sided. So you can see that this is one side, this is second side, this is third side, and this is fourth side. So it's called quadrilateral cartilage. Right. Okay. So in the nasal septum, the most important thing are the arteries. Very, very important. There are 5 arteries. The most important artery is phenopalatal artery, greater palatine artery, superior labial artery, anteethmoidal artery, and postethmoidal artery. Out of these 3, they carry the blood from external carotid artery, and these 2 they carry the blood from internal carotid artery. So nose has supply from both the carotids, internal and external, and the first 4 arteries they form Kisselbach's plexus. in Little's area. And this is the most common site of epistaxis. This is the most common site of epistaxis, right? So these are the other important points about the anatomy of the nasal septum. I told you nasal septum anatomy is very, very important. Besides those structures that you have to identify, these are the other important points about the nasal septum. And nasal septum fracture, trauma on nasal septum can lead to four things. It can cause epistaxis, which is a very, very important topic. It can cause septal hematoma. It can cause fracture of this septum, and it can cause DNS, deviated nasal septum. So one of the four can happen or may happen when there is a trauma on the nasal septum, either due to fall or during fight. It very common happens either there is accident is very common, bike and all, or when there is a fight, fist fight, somebody gets hit on the thing and then goes. So these are the few points about the nasal septum that one will have to remember. Let's go to the other question. All are correct about Meniere's disease except it is an endolymphatic hydrops. Males are more affected than females. The type of deafness is conductive, and compression of the endolymphatic sac is done. So again, a simple question. I'm sure you can answer. Please answer this in the choices. Try to answer as many of you as can possible. Try to answer. Maximum strength. Let's see what is your answer. It is endolymphatic hydrops. Males more common. Deafness is conductive hearing loss, and decompression of the endolymphatic sac is done. Yes, C, absolutely correct. Most of you said C. C is the correct answer. So, which is Meniere's disease is an inner ear disease. And in inner ear disease, it is sensory neural hearing loss, not conductive. Conductive hearing loss is in middle ear and external ear. Isn't it? You know this. So this is a very simple question. And I told you Meniere's is a very, very important topic when I give the list of the topics. What are the other things you have to know about Meniere's disease? You have to know that the other name, it is called endolymphatic hydrops. It has types. There are two types. One is called Lermaillot's disease, and the other is called Tumarkin's. These are types of Meniere's, Tumarkin's. Then cause, it is caused due to mutation in short arm of chromosome number 6. This is the cause, mutation in the short arm of chromosome number 6. It's in males, as we know already. It's more common in males. And sensory neural hearing loss, which is fluctuating. This is very important. Sensory hearing loss is fluctuating. Tinnitus is also fluctuating, and vertigo is pulsatile. Episodic, sorry. Vertigo is episodic, which lasts between 20 minutes to 24 hours. So how much is the duration of vertigo in Meniere's? 20 minutes to 24 hours is a very, very important point. Then investigation of choice is electrocochleography. So either electrocochleography or MRI is the investigation of choice. In electrocochleography is most sensitive investigation. That's why it is an investigation of choice. This is another very important point. And in this, ratio of summation potential versus action potential. This ratio must be more than 40% for diagnosis of Meniere's disease. The ratio of summation potential and action potential must be more than 40%. And treatment, like one of the surgeries, decompression of endolymphatic sac. This is one of the treatment. This is called Portman surgery. So there is Portman surgery. There is Cody and Fick surgery, also called Fick surgery, and intratympanic gentamicin. Now this is very, very important. Intratympanic gentamicin is done in which disease? Meniere's disease. And then medicines like vertigo drugs, antiemetics, things like that are also important. Right. So Meniere's disease is the most important disease from the inner ear that they ask you in the exam. And like I said, if you can remember these points, that will be helpful. And one of the questions I told you they ask you is how much is the duration of vertigo in Meniere's? And the answer is 20 minutes to 24 hours. Now, why is this question important? Because duration of vertigo varies from disease to disease. It is different in different disease. So sometimes if you know the duration of vertigo, it helps you in making diagnosis. So that's why they ask you this question, that how much is the duration of vertigo in each of them, because it can be very helpful in making some of the diagnosis. So in seconds, vertigo for seconds, which is less than 20 seconds, is seen in BPPV. Then for hours, 20 minutes to 24 hours. So this is called hours, this is Meniere's disease. Then for days, 10, 15 days, this is seen in vestibular neuronitis. And for months and years, chalta hi rehta. This is usually psychogenic. So these are some of the causes where by looking at the duration of vertigo, you can make out which is the disease. That's why this duration becomes an MCQ. In Meniere's, it is 20 minutes to 24 hours or hours, as they say, right? Now, Abhishek is asking me what is the role of gentamicin. Gentamicin is an aminoglycoside. And therefore it is autotoxic. Aminoglycosides are autotoxic. Now, among autotoxics, some are vestibulotoxic and some are cochleotoxic. That means among the aminoglycosides, some will damage the vestibule and some will damage the cochlea. And gentamicin is vestibulotoxic. So the example is gentamicin. So what it boils down to is that gentamicin is a vestibulotoxic drug. So if you give gentamicin, intratympanic gentamicin that we talked about, then it damages the vestibule, and vestibule is the cause of vertigo and nausea. So if we ask the patient of Meniere's, Meniere's, as I said, Meniere's can have these features. Meniere's can have sensory neuralinked loss, tinnitus, vertigo. But if you ask this patient which is the most troublesome, he will always say vertigo. Isko theek kar do, sir. Most of them, sir, please treat this. I can tolerate hearing loss and tinnitus, but treat this vertigo. And that's why the most important role in the treatment of Meniere's is to be able to treat the vertigo and nausea. And vertigo, as I said, is caused because of vestibule. So if you can damage the vestibule, the vertigo gets treated. And so we need a vestibulotoxic drug. And the vestibulotoxic drug in this case is gentamicin, even streptomycin can be used. Streptomycin is also a vestibulotoxic drug. Gentamicin, streptomycin, these are both vestibulotoxic drug. Okay. Okay. Then there is one more question based on this, so we'll discuss this more. There is one more question on this. Next question. McEwen's triangle is the surface landmark of. This is very simple. Tympanic part of the facial nerve, mastoid antrum, dome of lateral semicircular canal, inguinostapedial joint. So McEwen's triangle is landmark for which of the following? Okay. The tympanic part of facial nerve, mastoid antrum, dome of the lateral semicircular canal, and inguinostapedial joint. The answer, I'm sure, yes, correct. Most of you have answered correctly, is mastoid antrum. Mastoid antrum, you have to know 4 points. One, it is the largest cell of mastoid. Second point, it is 12 to 15 millimeters deep. Third, has a corner's septum. This is very important MCQ because corner's septum is formed by what is called petrosquamous suture. This is a very important MCQ. What forms the corner septum? Petrosquamous suture. And the last point is landmark. So this was the question, the last point, and you know the answer already, McEwen's triangle, which is also called suprameatal triangle. So this is also a correct answer, and the third correct answer is spine of Henle. This is also a correct answer. So all the three are correct answers when we talk about landmark for mastoid antrum. It's a very popular MCQ, very commonly asked, and so you should know this. And this is like a part of the anatomy question. I told you middle ear anatomy is important. So this is like a middle ear anatomy question. So remember this. A tympanic part of the facial nerve is called the horizontal part of the facial nerve. The landmark of this can be oval window. Oval window can be called the landmark of the tympanic part of the dome of the lateral canal has no landmark, and inguinostapedial joint has no landmark. These things, they don't have any landmarks. Okay, next question. A 3-year-old child presented with fever and dyspnea for 2 to 3 days. The child was febrile to touch. X-ray is shown. Which of the following is true? So look at the X-ray on the child who is less than 3 years old with fever and dyspnea for few days. This is case of croup. X-ray shows steeple sign. Nebulization should be done. All of the above are true. So which of the following is correct in this child? So let's see who gets it right. Please answer these questions, guys. I really hope that more will participate, more will try to answer. But take it, whatever you choose to. This is a case of croup. Isn't this a practice for you, like practice session? So if you answer, practice भी होगा. You must have answered. You already got the paper beforehand. So कुछ ना कुछ तो answer किया ही होगा आप लोगों ने. So put the same answer. It helps me know your thinking, so that what should I explain, how should I explain. So it's indirectly is going to benefit you. If you answer, indirectly you get benefited because I know what to say, what to explain. So Dhanu says all of the above, and that is a correct answer. Yes, this is a stipple sign, also called pencil tip sign. If you look at the airway, this dark shadow inside, it is like this. So this is called steeple which is on the top of the church, that steeple, and because it's also tip of the pencil tip sign, which is a feature of croup. Croup is also called laryngotracheobronchitis. Laryngotracheobronchitis. And nebulisis is the best treatment, and this is done with either adrenaline, which is epinephrine. So you can say any of the two is correct answer. Nebulization with adrenaline and epinephrine. Along with this, you have to give steroid. You have to give steroid, and you have to give antibiotics also. All the three has to be done. And we give antibiotics in a disease which is viral. Croup is a viral disease. It is caused by parainfluenza virus. Croup is caused by virus. Which one? Parainfluenza virus. So very important, this croup. And generally, croup is confused with tuberculosis, epiglottitis. Epiglottitis, which is a different disease, has thumb sign. The X-ray finding is thumb sign, very important. And the drug of choice, unlike croup, where you give steroid and nebulization, here it is cephalosporin. This is the drug of choice, cephalosporins. Okay. So try to differentiate between croup and epiglottitis, and you'll remember them better. Next question. Insertion of grommet tube is indicated in. Insertion of grommet tube is indicated in acute suppurative otitis media, secretive otitis media resistant to medical treatment, chronic otitis media, colostoma. Again, a very simple question. Most of you can answer this question. Acute suppurative otitis media, secretory otitis media that has failed medical treatment, chronic otitis media, colostoma. Yes, correct. You have to get this right because this is a very popular question, and we have done this already. I've told you that secretory otitis media, SOM. Secretory otitis media, serous otitis media, non-suppurative otitis media, otitis media with effusion, glue. These are same thing. These are same thing. And one is, it's the most common cause of hearing loss in children. We done this. Most common cause of hearing loss in children, and the treatment is this grommet insertion. Now grommet tube is also called ventilating tube. Ventilating tube is grommet. It is also called tympanotomy tube. Tympanotomy tube. Same thing. So the main indication of grommet is this one, serous otitis media. This is what we are talking about. But grommet is also used for Meniere's device. If you use Meniere's device in Meniere's disease, then also grommet has to be used. And the third indication is to maintain the air pressure of middle ear. Air pressure. So if you want to maintain the air pressure of the middle ear, again grommet might be required. But we have more questions on grommet, so we'll discuss about grommet then. We have more questions. But this tells us that otitis media, secretory otitis media, is a very important topic. We had a question before this. There's a question here, and we have few more questions based on this. It's such an important topic. So we'll go to the next question, question number 12. Identify this condition. So this is a CT scan. Identify this condition. Maxillary sinusitis, adenoid hypertrophy, bilateral corneal atresia, antral sign. Antral sign. Very easy, isn't it? Yes, it is indeed antral sign. Correct. So what is antral sign? Antral sign is also called Hallman-Miller sign, and it is seen in this posterior wall of maxilla is pushed anteriorly by who? By juvenile nasopharyngeal angiofibroma. So this is a tumor called juvenile nasopharyngeal angiofibroma. Correct, Raj. Correct, Hari. So you can see this is the maxilla M maxilla. This is M maxilla. And look at the arrow. Compare the maxilla on the other side. The posterior wall of the maxilla is pushed anteriorly. This is antral sign, Hallman-Miller sign. Now maxilla is also called antrum of Highmore. Antrum of Highmore is the other name for maxilla. In short, it is called antrum. The short name of maxilla is antrum, and from there this name comes antral sign. So antral sign comes from this name antrum of Highmore, which is the maxilla, and because the maxilla has a problem, the name is such. Right. Now, juvenile nasopharyngeal angiofibroma is another very important topic. There are 4 or 5 MCQs. Site. The site is sphenopalatine foramen. This is the most common site, sphenopalatine foramen. Then it is the main presentation is epistaxis plus minus cheek swelling in boys. Boys is juvenile male child, never in females, never in adults. So it's always in boys. And 2 signs, one is antral sign, this is the MCQ. There's another sign called frog face, is another sign. And then treatment is embolization followed by surgery by excision. So these are some of the points about juvenile nasopharyngeal, and there are many gradings. There are many grading, or you can call it classification of angiofibroma. 2 important names are Fish classification, and there is another one called Sessions classification. These 2 are main, but then we have Andrews, Rodinsky's, and Chandler's. There are other classifications also, but these 2 names are the one that you must remember. They are important names. Right. So angiofibroma in the nasopharynx is very important topic. Next one. The inferior meatus receives the opening of A. Maxillary sinus, B. Anteethmoidal sinus, C. Postethmoidal sinus, and D. Nasolacrimal duct. So again, simple question. This is a question which was asked few years back, and it's a very common ask. Different meatus, what they receive, like in this case they asked about inferior meatus. Similarly, they can ask about middle meatus, about superior meatus, supreme meatus, whatever. So what is your correct answer? Yes, correct. The answer is nasolacrimal duct. NLD in short. Maxillary sinus opens in the middle meatus. Anteromural sinus also opens in the middle meatus. And posterior opens in the superior meatus. Frontal sinus opens in the middle meatus, and sphenoid sinus opens in the supreme meatus. So which sinus opens where is given here. Very, very important. So if I make it sequentially correctly, if I write the sequence correctly, uh, supreme meatus has sphenoid opening, superior meatus has posterior opening, middle meatus has antethmoid, frontal and maxilla opening, and inferior meatus has nasolacrimal duct. And I can't tell you how important this, how many times they keep on asking. Remember I told you the anatomy of the medial wall, septum, and the lateral wall. So this is lateral wall anatomy. They ask this. Anatomy of the lateral wall of the nose is another very, very important topic. So know this. Next question. Another simple question. Mikulicz cell is characteristic histological finding in A. Rhinoscleroma, B. Rhinosporidiosis, C. Aspergillosis, and D. Sarcoidosis. So Mikulicz cell is a characteristic finding in which of these? Rhinoscleroma, Rhinosporidiosis, Aspergillosis, and Sarcoidosis. I knew everybody will get it correct. It's a simple question. Correct? Rhinoscleroma. Rhinoscleroma and rhinosporidiosis. I told you granulomas of the nose, these two are very, very important topic. Rhinoscleroma is caused by Klebsiella rhinoscleromatis, which is also called Fris bacilli. Fris bacilli. And it is called Hebra nose. It is called woody nose. Histopathology shows either this one, Mikulicz cell, or Russell body. And the drug of choice is streptomycin. So these are the common points about rhinoscleroma that you have to know. Very important. Similarly, rhinosporidiosis is caused by Rhinosporidium seabury. This is an aquatic protozoa. Lives in collected water in the southern India, and so it's southern India coastal areas, and it presents as either we call it bleeding polyp. You know, polyps of the nose do not bleed. Normal polyp of the nose do not bleed, but this looks like a polyp, it bleeds. So it's not polyp, it looks like that, and it bleeds. So we call it bleeding polyp, also called strawberry polyp. Because the bleed, it looks because the bleed, it becomes very red, deep red, like a strawberry color. So it's called strawberry polyp. And the drug of choice in this time is Dapsone. Yes, somebody is saying that Dhanu, I think, is saying that this is also called taper nose. Taper nose is also a correct name So three names for rhinoscleroma: Hebra nose, woody nose, tapir nose. Correct. All are correct. So these two diseases, they are very, very important. I already told you and I gave you the list of the and the only other thing you have to know is rhinophyma, but I think we have a question on that, so we'll discuss later. So very, very important this one. Mucolis cell Russell body and all that. Mucolis cell. Next question. Perforation of the bony part. This is bony. Perforation of the bony part of the nasal septum occurs in sarcoidosis, rhinoscleroma, tuberculosis, and syphilis. Perforation of the bony part of nasal septum occurs in which of the following? Perforation then occur in sarcoidosis, rhinoscleroma, tuberculosis, and syphilis. Again, simple question. It was asked in your exam. It's an old question. So questions which are asked in the exam already are easy because usually you have discussed them somewhere. And syphilis, they can cause perforation in cartilage part. And syphilis can cause perforation in bony part of the nasal septum. And that is syphilis in the nose is a very important or dangerous condition. Rhinoscleroma we just discussed. Right? Tuberculosis of nose is uncommon. Tuberculosis of the nose is uncommon. Tuberculosis in the larynx and tuberculosis of the ear is common. Yes. So TB is the correct. TB does not cause perforation in the bony part. No. Not in the nasal septum. This is nasal septum. Tuberculosis does not cause perforation. Very common. Tuberculosis as it is a very, very rare disease, as I said, in the nose. And even if it causes perforation, which is very rare, it is on the cartilage part, not on the bony part. This is an old question. Like I said, it has been asked in your exam. I have not created this question. It was asked. So I picked and placed here. Next one. Which of the following is true of this image? The diagnosis was ASOM. Surgery is done in the antero-inferior quadrant. The patient is usually an adult. All are true. So which of the following is true in this patient? So there is an image shown and simple question. So let's see what you answer, guys. Answer this question. Not a difficult question once again. Yeah. The answer is B. See, this is image of grommet, isn't it? Inserted. And I discussed grommet insertion is either in glue ear, which is serous otitis media. So many times we have discussed already today also. And the other indication for grommet I told you is Minet's device. Minet's device in Meniere's disease, which is not the case. So not in ASOM. In ASOM we do only myringotomy without grommet. In ASOM we never put grommet. It is not required. It's not ASOM because we are not, there is grommet inside. In ASOM there is no grommet. And grommet is always put in the antero-inferior quadrant. Always. So B is correct. And we just discussed that serous otitis media is more common in children. We discussed this today itself. In fact, it is the most common cause of hearing loss in children. Glue ear is the most common cause of hearing loss in children, not in adult. So all cannot be true. Rest of the point about otitis media we have done already. But I told you grommet, few more points like it is called ventilating tube. and tympanotomy tube. They are types of grommet. We know the indications of grommet. You have seen the image of grommet. They are types of grommet. Three types you have to remember. One is called Reuter-Robin. Reuter-Robin type. Then Shea type and Shepherd type. These are three types of grommet that can be used. And the most common complication of grommet is blockade of the grommet. This is the most common complication of grommet. It often gets blocked. Right? Is the answer given C? If the answer is given C, then there is a printing mistake. C is not the correct answer. B is the correct answer without any doubt. Okay. So Raj is saying C is given in the choice. No, B is correct answer without any doubt. So there is a printing mistake, that means. Let me check. Question number 16. Let me check. Was it my mistake or their mistake? I'm just checking. Just hold on, huh? 16. Yeah, it's my mistake. 16. I have given them this choice C, so it was my mistake. B. Done. Then next one. Anterior ethmoid presents bulge in the middle ear called. Anterior ethmoid presents as a bulge in the middle ear called bulla ethmoidalis, concha bullosa, lamina papyracea, hiatus semilunaris. So I think most of you will get this answer correct. Let's see. Yeah. A is the correct answer. Bulla ethmoidalis. And even if you don't know, the hint is there. See, it is ethmoidal cell and the name is ethmoidalis. So you can get a hint from there. So bulla ethmoidalis is the anterior ethmoid that presents as a bulge in middle ear, and it is the largest ethmoidal cell and is largest cell of ethmoid. So this is another question they ask you. Which of the following is the largest ethmoidal cell? Bulla ethmoidalis. This is also an MCQ. Any idea, guys, what is concha bullosa? This one, concha bullosa. Please write in the comment. Let's see what is concha bullosa. What do you think? आता है कि नहीं? Concha bullosa. It is described as pneumatized middle turbinate. Pneumatized middle turbinate. So middle turbinate is pneumatized. Pneumatized means hawa bhar jana. Air gets filled inside. It's like a balloon. So it also looks like balloon, but the name is concha bullosa. So in bulla ethmoidalis, the air is inside the bulla ethmoid. So it is big like a balloon. And in concha bullosa, the air is inside the middle turbinate. So it's big like a concha, like a bullosa. See, bullosa and bulla are very similar term. This bulla and bullosa are same, which means like a balloon. So anything like a balloon will swell up when the air inside. So bulla ethmoidalis is the largest cell. Largest, see, you have written largest cell, Why? Because the air is inside. हवा भर गया balloon की तरह. And in this it is bulla, so air pneumatize. Turbinate के अंदर there is air inside. What is lamina propria? Lamina propria is paper thin bone. Paper thin bone. Propria means paper like, paper thin, propria, and it is separating between nose and orbit. So it is separating the nose from the orbit, a very paper thin bone. And why is this bone important, lamina propria? That during surgery of the nose, this can get damaged very easily because a thin bone, so it gets fractured and damaged very easily, and that can create problems in the eye. During nose surgery, eye can start having problem because this bone. And hiatus semilunaris, hiatus means door, and half semilunaris means half moon. So this is a half moon shaped bone, half moon, which is like this. Half moon is like this, so this half moon shaped bone in osteomeatal complex. So it's a part of the osteomeatal complex in the middle ear, in the middle meatus, Okay, so these are the terms that you might be required to know. They are not difficult terms once you know them. Okay, next one. The most common site of nasal bleeding. Now come on, this is not fair, है ना? इतना आसान क्वेश्चन देना बनता नहीं है. But in the exam they ask you. If you notice in the exam, almost 30% of the questions are like this. Very, very, very simple, very basic question. Because your examiner want that you should feel that I know. 30% are very simple and 20-30% are very tough, extremely tough. So 30% simple, most can answer, almost everybody. 30% are very, very tough, 20-30% which they believe nobody can answer, should be able to answer, very few people who have only read very nicely. So the real game is in the between 40%. So bach gaya. How do you do with those 40% decides your fate, which are neither tough nor easy. They are in between. So if you have read well, you can answer them properly. If you are not read them well, you will not be able to answer. So that is going to decide. Anyways, in this case, I'm sure everybody has answered this Little's area. I just told you also. This has Kisselbach's plexus. And we have discussed the arteries that form the Kisselbach's plexus. We have done this. McEwen's triangle, we discussed, is a landmark for mastodantrum. This again we have discussed already. Piriform fossa is a part of the hypopharynx. And it is a common site for foreign body. Foreign body gets stuck here very commonly. And sphenoplateral recess is the other name for supreme meatus. Supreme meatus is also called sphenoethmoidal recess. Remember there are 4 meatus, and we discussed different sinus, ostia open, different meatus. The inferior meatus has nasolacrimal duct. So supreme meatus, where there is a sphenoid ostia, is also called sphenoethmoidal recess. This is another very important MCQ actually. This name is an MCQ, right? But epistaxis is an important topic. So let's know a few points about epistaxis. Most common site and sphenopalatine artery is artery of epistaxis. The most common cause is one of the two. Either nose picking. If it is given in the choice, this is your correct answer. Nose picking. If nose picking is not given, idiopathic is the second answer. The most common cause of nasal bleeding. And the first thing in the treatment of nasal bleeding, the first thing that you do is nose pinching. Nose pinch. then cautery with silver nitrate. This is very important MCQ. Which is the chemical used for cautery? And like I said, silver nitrate is the chemical that you use for cautery. Very, very important. And if this fails, then we do nasal packing. And if this fails, ligation. So this is the sequence that you follow for nasal bleeding. And when you do ligation, the first artery that you will ligate is sphenopalatine artery ligation, then maxillary artery ligation, then external carotid artery ligation. And this is another question, that if you are ligated the external carotid artery and the bleeding still continues, it is not stopping, the epistaxis is still happening, then your last option is anterior ethmoidal ligation. So they may ask you, after external carotid ligation the bleeding is still happening, what do you do? The answer is anterior ethmoidal ligation, because this is the only artery now that can bleed. After external carotid artery ligation, if it is bleeding, it has to be from this artery. Anterior. Okay, so these are some of the points about epistaxis, which is another one of the most important topic from the nose is this epistaxis. Right. The most common source of primary hemorrhage in tonsillectomy. This is a question which was asked in NEET PG actually last time. In the last NEET PG they had asked, and so I thought why not discuss. So I'm sure you know the answer. Paratonsillar plexus of veins, tonsillar branch of facial artery, ascending pharyngeal artery, and ascending palatine artery. Which is the correct answer? Yes, please write. Correct. I knew everybody will get it right. Yes, it is paratonsillar plexus of veins. So it's a venous bleed, not the arterial bleed during tonsillectomy. And tonsillar artery is the main artery of tonsil. This question was asked in the INICET exam, that Central University exam, INICET. So see, there are two questions here, 2 points here. One was asked in the NEET PG, one was asked in the INICET exam. NEET PG, they asked the same question. Primary bleeding of tonsillectomy is from where? It is from the veins. This is your answer. And in the INICET, they are asked that which is the main artery of the tonsil? Tonsillar branch of facial artery. These are also supplying, but tonsillar branch of facial artery is the main artery of the tonsil. Right. Tonsillectomy is a very, very important topic. Tonsil artery and tonsillectomy. And the most common indication for tonsillectomy is recurrent tonsillitis. I think we have a question on this, or chronic tonsillitis. And position of the patient during tonsillectomy is called Rose position. And most common complication is bleeding. Bleeding epistaxis is the most common complication. And what do you do when there's a Grisel syndrome? Grisel syndrome is also complication. Grisel syndrome is called atlantoaxial joint dislocation. So when there is a atlantoaxial joint dislocation, that is called Grisel syndrome. And in this, the head position is described as Robin Koch position. Robin Koch position of head in this Grisel syndrome, which is after either tonsillectomy or adenoidectomy. So few points, but they are very, very commonly asked in tonsillectomy. So a lot of questions about tonsillectomy, lot of point about tonsillectomy that you must ideally remember. Next one. Leukoplakia of the oral and pharyngeal mucosa is A. Malignant condition, B. Precancerous condition, C. Inflammatory condition, D. Toxic condition. Leukoplakia. of the oral and pharyngeal mucosa is malignant, precancerous, inflammatory, or toxic. Again, it's a very popular name. Most of you know. Please write in the comment. I'm waiting for your answers. Yes, precancerous or pre-malignant. So which are the common pre-malignant conditions of the throat? Common pre-malignant conditions of the throat. The most important condition is erythroplakia. It's the main condition. Then we have leukoplakia. This is our answer. Pre-malignant is called precancerous also. Same thing. Leukoplakia or erythroplakia. Then submucosal fibrosis. Then lichen planus. Then pachyderma. Laryngeal papilloma. Then Plummer-Vinson syndrome. And chronic hyperplastic candidiasis. So lot of pre-malignant condition of the throat. Lot of pre-malignant condition in the throat. So remember this list of conditions which can cause malignancy. So in these cases, if the patient have any of this situation, you have to be careful because you have to follow up the patient more regularly. So these patients, they have to be followed up more regularly. They have to come to your clinic every 3 months or 6 months, because that will, you can pick up immediately. If the patient starts having problem, immediately you will come to know that the patient is having problem, and so you can do the correct treatment. And usually it is due to smoking, alcohol, spicy food, and the patient has to avoid all these things. You tell them no smoking, no drinking, no spicy food and all that. Now one very important point is that all these causes are in males. They are all mainly males. Carcinoma is only males, except Plummer-Vinson syndrome. This is more common in females. It's a problem of female, right? So this causes carcinoma in the hypopharynx, postcricoid, hypopharynx, to be more precise, in what is called postcricoid area. So I've written this, that they may ask you that which of the following head and neck tumor is more common in females. Which of these they'll give you 4 names and they'll ask you which of these head and neck tumors is more common in females, and then you say postcricoid carcinoma is the only head and neck carcinoma which is more common in females. All other carcinomas are more common in males. And why is postcricoid carcinoma more common in female? Because it is due to Plummer-Vinson syndrome, and this Plummer-Vinson syndrome is more common in females. So remember this very, very, very important point. And this list of pre-malignant conditions is a very important MCQ. There are 2 controversial points here. This one I'm putting a question mark, and this is a question mark. So these are controversial questions. Some books says they are pre-malignant, some say they should not be considered pre-malignant. These books will say they are not pre-malignant, they are not pre-malignant. According to some books, they are risk factor. They'll say they should be considered as risk factors for carcinoma, but should not be called a pre-malignant. So there is a controversy technically. Why I'm saying this? Suppose they ask you a question: which of the following is not a pre-malignant condition in the throat? One choice they give you this one, one choice they give you one this one, and one, let's say, this one. So we know this is 100% true, this is 100% true, this is 100% true, and they were given this in the choice. This is the only choice left. So that means this particular person who has framed the question does not believe this is pre-malignant. He believes it is a risk factor. So this becomes a correct answer. That's how you have to pick up the correct answer. Right.